Hello, welcome to Convergent Dialogues. This is Xavier Bonilla. On this episode, I'm talking with Hugo Drochon. Hugo is a political theorist and historian of political thought with interest in democratic theory, liberalism, and the politics of Friedrich Nietzsche. He is a professor at the University of Nottingham. He did his postdoc research with conspiracy and democracy research in Cambridge, where he also got his PhD. His book, Nietzsche's Great Politics, is where we mostly focus on the conversation. We start by talking about why, for a long time, people have not examined Nietzsche's political thought. Many people look at his philosophy of morals or some of his other critiques about Christianity, but his politics seems to go underlooked, and it's been that way for quite some time. So we talk about that. We talk about what are Nietzsche's great politics, why Nietzsche emphasized culture and the emphasis of a hierarchical system. We talk about Nietzsche's political philosophy as an inversion of Plato's philosophy. We talk about how to build a culture. Then we talk about the philosophy of state and democracy, slavery and caste systems, Nietzsche's politics with all of his many other themes, such as the Übermensch and eternal recurrence of the same, etc. And we talk about Nietzsche's politics and how much of it could be extended to politics in our current times and some of the contours of doing that. I really love this conversation because, as many folks will know, Nietzsche is one of my favorite philosophers, and he's someone that's a very necessary philosopher, but someone that's tough to really kind of wrestle with in a lot of ways, to kind of get at the accuracy of many of the things he's saying. And he's quite profound. And we had a great conversation again on his politics and why that's kind of central to how Nietzsche looked at things. And so reading Nietzsche's philosophy in that light is, I think, supremely important. As always, you can find this conversation and all other conversations at convergentdialogues.substack.com. I'm also on YouTube, so go and subscribe and follow and share widely. And now I bring you Hugo Drochon. I'm here with Hugo Drochon. Hugo, thanks so much for coming on the podcast. I'm looking forward to talking with you.
Thank you very much for having me on. I'm looking forward to the chat too.
Yeah, absolutely. You have written a really, really, really wonderful book on Nietzsche, which you don't see a lot of. People kind of talk about him, write essays, things like that. But it's, people kind of have this interesting kind of mix with Nietzsche. He's kind of well quoted and cited in some ways, but I really, really enjoyed it. The book's called Nietzsche's Great Politics. It's been out for a couple of years now. It's out in the paperback, which came out in 2018, and the hardcover's out there. So it's fabulous. Before we get into the book and Nietzsche and his philosophy, why don't you tell listeners a little bit about yourself, just what your professional academic background is and any of the specifics that you're currently up to.
Great. Well, thanks for the kind words about the book. So, I'm currently, actually, I can say this on the podcast, I've been promoted. So I'm now associate professor in political theory.
Oh, very nice.
At the University of Nottingham in the UK. Robin Hood, for the listeners out there, that's the association. And the book you're talking about, I did my PhD at the University of Cambridge in the UK, and the book was on Nietzsche's politics. Sorry, the PhD was on Nietzsche's politics, and then that led to, with some revisions, etc., led to the book that you just spoken about. So that's that's it. What else is there to say? Half Irish, half French. I think that was people have those questions about where I'm from, but that's it. It's not a very exciting career so far.
What do you mostly, I guess, teach on? Do you teach on continental philosophy, or is there a specific space, or are you kind of all over the place?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm in a politics department, so we tend so it's political theory. So we teach the classic kind of more history political thought, Plato to NATO in the first year to the first year undergraduates. The second year course might teach us on democracy and its critics, where we look at the different theories of democracy, Tocqueville or whoever it might be. And then third year courses, teach a course with a colleague on populism,
Mm,
elites,
mm,
democracy. So there's actually democracy is a bit of a theme, which is we were speaking about this before starting that I'm desperately trying to finish the second book,
mm,
which is going to be on democracy, elites and democracy. So that's been a bit of my focus since Nietzsche. So
mm,
hopefully I'm hoping anyway, I'll finish it soon.
that's
Because it
wonderful.
takes
Yeah.
time. Yeah.
Yeah. That's again, it's a very, very timely kind of discussion, and be very interested to read that. So that will be exciting. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about Nietzsche. Um, I feel like I said Nietzsche is something that's kind of known. He's kind of quoted a lot, but a lot of people, I think people might casually read him. I think one of the things that has been more, uh, maybe more understood recently. There's been a few works that have come out. Um, is about his politics and really seeing him as a, I don't know if you want to say a political philosopher, but definitely a philosopher or thinker that was really, I think like anybody is, but specifically for him and his thought, shaped by his time and shaped by kind of politics in general. So I guess how do we read Nietzsche's political thought, and why do you think for a while most people have ignored this and just focused on his morals or just focused on aspects of life? Again, those are major themes. He's got a lot of big themes. But why do you think the political side or the political thought of Nietzsche has gone kind of untapped, at least in many ways in which people think of him?
Yeah, it goes back to World War II and the kind of association that Nietzsche had at that time with Nazism, or at least that the Nazis tried at a certain moment appropriate him as a basis for their own then kind of philosophy. So that's where the controversy started for. So when I mean in the US setting, there's really one great interpreter of Nietzsche, Walter Kaufmann, who
Yeah.
then teaches at Princeton. And he was actually spent some time in Germany during the war, and this is when he discovers Nietzsche, and he thinks it's very, very interesting, but is obviously very conscious of the fact that, well, I'm not going to be able to just talk about Nietzsche in this kind of way, but given the context that he was just operating out after the war, and Nietzsche has this kind of tainted association. So Kaufman said, okay, well, how can we save Nietzsche in many ways from the bestiary he had fallen into? And so Kaufman consciously said, look, actually Nietzsche wasn't really interested in politics at all. That's not what his main focus on. His focus was really about philosophy. He was actually this 19th century humanist, really wasn't interested in politics. That was really a secondary concern. So we could just kind of put the politics aside, and we can focus on his philosophy and his ideas of morality or whatever it might be. And in many ways, that was a way to kind of save him from that philosophical abyss he'd fallen into during World War II. So politics was quite taboo on the one hand, because if you talked about politics, people say, oh yeah, Nietzsche was a Nazi. Or then the move would say, oh, well, Nietzsche wasn't really interested in politics at all.
Mm.
But that dominated for a very, very long time. And it's only recently that this has started changing somewhat. I think the first change came about, we were talking briefly before on air about, or no, so you asked me a question about continental philosophy.
Mhm.
In France, for instance, in Germany, Nietzsche politics still remains a bit taboo, given obviously the context.
Sure.
But in France, interestingly, France never had that taboo, because from the very beginning, some of the people there said, no, actually, Nietzsche and Nazism, it's just a fraudulent kind of link. So we're just not going to take any of that at all. And that then allowed the time interpretations that we have with Foucault, with Derrida, with these types of people.
Mm.
And when that kind of French theory, or whatever you want to call it, kind of migrated to the US, then that allowed different people to talk about Nietzsche and politics again. But it was very much from that perspective. Say, okay, well, some of these ideas, it became the way it expressed itself in many ways is that you associated Nietzsche with agonistic politics,
Mm.
and this had a strong kind of postmodern philosophical basis for it, because a lot of it was to do with how there's no such thing as a fixed identity. It's about challenging different identities, and this is one way you can talk about democracy. So it was really kind of it was more of like using Nietzsche as a way of talking about politics, rather than specifically looking at what Nietzsche himself said about politics. And some people started doing that. And what I tried to do basically in the book was to say, well, there's these two ways. Either we say Nietzsche doesn't have politics, or we kind of think about Nietzsche as this, some of Nietzsche's philosophical ideas give us a basis for a postmodern, radical, agonistic form of democracy. And what I thought about doing in the book is like, well, actually, Nietzsche wasn't writing in the 20th century or in the 21st. Actually, he's writing at the end of the 19th century. And if we look at what the context of the 19th century, then maybe that gives us a better idea when Nietzsche was talking about politics. What exactly did he mean? What was the context there? Because obviously it's not the Nazi context, or it's not postmodernism, which he influenced. So that was the main, I think, shift that I hoped to do with the book.
Yeah. It's interesting. It's always interesting to me how so much of a certain point in writing can have um, an impact on how people view or read or shape. Kaufman was obviously huge in a lot of ways, and I think he has a lot of great contributions. But it's interesting how he kind of if you will, gerrymandered how we view or how we talk about or think about Nietzsche's thought. And I think he had a lot of access to his stuff. He did the translation. I mean, he was huge, but maybe not a lot of people were in the U.S. at least were writing or thinking about him at the time. But it's interesting how those kind of things just kind of get stuck there, and then we don't update, if you will. And so I think it's nice to see a few folks. I'm thinking of the big book that came out. It's the Italian guy. It's like 1,000 pages. I just finished reading it.
Lo Surdo.
Lo Surdo, yeah. And it just got translated into English, and it was great. I mean, it was a great book, and it talks a lot about his politics, and so it's interesting to see that. There's a lot of themes to pull here. So we there's too many. We won't be able to get to all of them, but I want to talk about the big ones. There's a few big things here, so we can just kind of hit them as we go. The book is called Nietzsche's Great Politics, and you mentioned that there. This is obviously a reference to something Nietzsche has said as well. Could you talk about what great politics is for Nietzsche, maybe as opposed to petty politics, as he likes to describe it, and what's the kind of connection there? What he's trying to get at, or what he's saying by great politics?
Yeah, this goes back to that try to move to say, let's look at Nietzsche within his own context. And if you put Nietzsche back in his own context, it's 19th century Germany, more specifically, it's Bismarck. And he's witness to the unification of Germany. These are big, momentous historical and political events. And so if you go back and you think, okay, Bismarck, what was Bismarck's main policy? So we know Bismarck's policy was like, okay, we have a few wars with different countries so we can unite Germany under Prussia and exclude actually Austria. That was one of it. There's all these, so there's these famous phrases associated with Bismarck: blood and iron. Right? This is how you unify Germany, through blood and iron, through wars and through technology. Mm-hmm. And so that's one term. But the other term that is associated with that, with Bismarck's politics, is große Politik, big politics, or great politics. Because the idea was to say Bismarck wanted to make Germany a great power through blood and iron, through its wars, through its technological innovations and transformation. And he wanted to be a great power like Russia was at the time. This is the late 19th century. Russia, France, the UK, which had its colonies. There's all these questions of colonies. So at the time, the politics was really about power politics. And it was about different countries kind of vying off against one another. Also quite different to the kind of, well, obviously now we talk about, post-World II, there was superpowers, right? There was really just the US, and there was Russia. Today, maybe we're going to maybe a bit more of a multipolar world, or not. We're seeing the rise of China. But at the time, it was really these European countries who were kind of battling it out for world supremacy. So that's why the book is called Great Politics, because the politics, the term that was dominating the politics of his day would have been Bismarck's große Politik. And he had personal experience. He served as a medical orderly during the Franco-Prussian War. So he witnessed this firsthand in many ways. But very quickly, at first, he's kind of like, when he's young, he's quite sympathetic to the idea of German unification. Partially, this was the influence of Wagner was having on him. Wagner, who was quite militaristic, quite nationalist. So when he was hanging out with Wagner at the time, he kind of falls in step with that. But actually, very quickly, he becomes very, very, very critical of it. So Bismarck's policies, he thinks are actually, and this is why in the change you get from great politics and petty politics. It's like, oh, Bismarck is pretending that he's doing this great politics of German unification, power politics, et cetera, et cetera. But actually, what he's really doing is, this is Philistinism. Bismarck thinks that because Germany has beaten France, that all of a sudden German culture is superior, but that's actually a joke. French culture remains much more superior. And the type of nationalism and all these types of things will be subsumed under, these great divides that Nietzsche has between master morality and slave morality or herd morality. Where it says, actually, the type of policies and type of politics that Bismarck is pursuing, he thinks it's great politics, but actually it's just a form of slave morality. It's Philistinism, it's petty, it's nationalistic, it's xenophobic, all that. It's a form of slave morality, actually. And so this is why he changes these terms. It's a very Nietzschean thing to do, right? We know good and bad becomes good and evil. Here it's the same. It's like, okay, we have große Politik, great politics, but actually great politics is really petty politics. And then Nietzsche, at least that's what I try to argue in the book, over the course of his life, tries to think about, well, if Bismarck's policies and politics is based on slave morality, what would a truly great politics based on master morality actually amount to? And I think there's a vision I try to then explore in the book.
Yeah, no, that's very, very nicely said. I'll make a footnote here. You talked about blood and iron. I had the wonderful Katja Hoyer. She's a historian. She wrote a book called Blood and Iron, coming off of that speech, and talks about the second Reich, I guess it is, the unified German Empire, 1871. It's on the podcast. I can't remember which episode it is, but we had a lovely conversation. And people can listen to that for kind of the historical reference that you're mentioning there. We kind of go through it and lay it out and what was happening. So that might actually be a nice compliment there. So where does this idea of when he was trying to think of Nietzsche, when he was trying to think of a modern society, there's a lot of emphasis on culture. Now, I want to understand the important context of this, because many people today will look at culture today in 21st century, 2023, and say, see, let me go to my Nietzsche and just see what he has to say about culture. That's not to say that there isn't a lot of valid, maybe, application you can get from his philosophy for today's culture. But as you just stated, it's a much different time when he was, where he was living and when he was living, kind of turn of the 20th century there. And so, what is it that we can understand about modern society for him, and why he placed this emphasis on culture? I have other follow-ups to that, but I'll let you start with that. What was the emphasis there?
Yeah, again, I think if you put it back in the context of the 19th century, there was these big debates, precisely because if Germany was unifying, then the question was, well, what is German culture? And what is German culture going to be on the basis of unification? And this is a big debate that everybody's kind of having in the 19th century. And the Germans in particular, what they look back to ancient Greece, and they see Greece and they say, okay, the ancient Greece, that was a great culture. And there's this link that we're going to try to make between ancient Greece and then modern German culture, the German culture of the 19th century. So there is this debate, and Nietzsche's participating then in this debate also about 19th culture. And actually, this is when the start of the disagreement starts with Wagner, where Wagner thinks, the ancient Greeks, they were great, and we want to recreate also this great culture in Germany. But one of the problems that the ancient Greeks had was slavery, and it's like, we need to get rid of slavery. And Nietzsche actually says, well, actually, no. The Greeks managed to have this great culture precisely because they had slavery, so the two were linked. So this is the start of the debate that Nietzsche has with Wagner, and the start of the falling out actually is on this political question. So there's the real question about what is German culture going to be. What its kind of features is, because at the time it's like, French culture has, it's got its paintings, it's got a philosophy, it's got all these different things. What is German culture going to be? And Nietzsche writes at the beginning, he says, well, culture is the unity of style. so that if a certain country has a culture, then a certain style of that country, you will be able to see it in its paintings and in its philosophy, in its writings, in its operas, and you could say, okay, that's something that that is specifically German. Um, whether he, I mean, he quickly moved away from the idea that we wanted a pure German culture. That's something that Wagner wanted. He moved away from that very quickly and actually started thinking, no, what we need is some kind of European culture that would be more interesting than a purely German culture, which he gave up quite quickly, and he didn't think was really going to come together, precisely because of the stuff we just spoke about, which is that, oh well, Bismarck, great politics. Yeah, just because you beat France on the battlefield doesn't mean you've beaten them culturally or not. And he wasn't very optimistic about what would happen there. So yeah, I think that's the hopefully that answers at least part of the question that you're asking. It's like that's the context and how you have to understand culture at the time.
Yeah, there's this idea of a high cultural society and a lower democratic society. So how did you think that worked pragmatically? It sounds like there's a certain hierarchy here, right? Of maybe elites, maybe people that aren't elites, but in the context of building, if you will, a culture or something, a distinct culture, how is he looking at this kind of hierarchy system?
Yeah, exactly. That's the disagreement he's having with Wagner. Wagner says, "Oh no, we need to have this kind of democratic nationalist culture," which is why when he builds the theater, there's no boxes, right? Because the idea of the boxes, like the boxes in a theater, the opera, that's for like VIPs. He's like, no, we get rid of that. We just have a unified kind of parterre where everybody sits there. The irony, of course, is that then the parterre just becomes so expensive that nobody can actually go, and that's still the case today. So that Wagner is trying to think about, yes, this nationalist kind of culture for the whole of Germany. And Nietzsche's point is to say, well, actually, no, precisely. If you look at the Greeks already, you can see, well, there has to be inequality to be able to create a form of high culture. So you're right in saying Nietzsche does think there's a difference between high culture and kind of lower culture, and that is an obligatory divide to maintain if you want to attain high cultural achievement. What exactly he means by that is it's kind of hard to know, but like, you know, the pantheon of great, right, good, at least for Nietzsche, it's like good, these great people. If that's what we want to if that's what we want to produce, then actually we do need to think seriously about how resources are distributed in society, and that perhaps resources have to be distributed somewhat unequally so that these people like Goethe can actually appear. Because that's the point about the ancient Greek state, is that, well, it's only when you have a division of labor where some people work and some people don't work that you can have culture, because you need the time to be able to create culture. If you're working all day in the field, you're not going to be able to do philosophy or whatever it might be. So there is a question of distribution of resources, and Nietzsche says that's an essential part of high culture. It's not, if you get rid of it, you're not going to achieve it.
I'll come to the modern, I guess, applications of that,
Yeah.
but because I think it's interesting. Before we get there, let's stay with the Greeks for a minute. So, talk about how Nietzsche's in philosophy is a type of inversion of Plato's philosophy, right? So, you know, Plato begins with philosophy, and Nietzsche kind of begins with culture, and these are starting points of different ways of looking at life. So, you talk about these three means Nietzsche ascribes to Plato: his political strategy, purpose to writing, his mode of political activism. How, I mean, I think it's been, you know, well stated that Nietzsche was pretty influenced by Plato. He was influenced by lots of the Greeks, you know, obviously Heraclitus and many of the other pre-Socratics, but Plato was a huge influence on Nietzsche's thought, especially, it sounds like, politically. So how is Plato seemed to be doing a kind of different task in terms of doing kind of strict philosophy of sorts, or that kind of thinking. Nietzsche was trying to look at how do we use this for kind of culture. How was this inversion of Nietzsche's inversion of Plato's kind of thinking and philosophy?
Yeah, there's a few parts there. I think the first thing and this is surprising, but it's kind of interesting that Nietzsche really thinks it's Plato who's the turning point and not Socrates. So, because the broader story to tell, which goes back again to this question of culture and the links between Germany and Greece, at least as they're trying to theorize it, it's like, well, when does Greek culture start going wrong? And Nietzsche thinks it's really Plato. It's with Plato that it starts going wrong. And the reason why he thinks it starts going wrong is that before all these greats you've mentioned, Heraclitus or Socrates, whatever, they all had this one idea, but that idea, that philosophical idea, was linked to the city or wherever they were in Greece, and it was kind of a healthy relationship. But it's with Plato where Plato turns away from the city and starts attacking it from the outside. And that's when you have a separation then between culture, if you want, and politics. And Nietzsche thinks about, well, okay, how do we get back to a moment where philosophers are not these external people who are kind of ostracized and disliked by society more generally? How do we get a healthy relationship between the two of them going again? Which goes back to this question we just had: distribution of resources. How is it that we, how can we have this? If we want great artists, great philosophers, then how do we organize society in such a way that we can have them? So he really thinks about that. So in many ways, yes, it's about going back through time to recreate a harmony that was there that has been lost. And so you mentioned also the kind of reverse Platonism. It's because Nietzsche interprets Plato as, especially all the ideas of the good in itself as these abstract ideals that are outside of society. And Nietzsche doesn't want that separation. He wants us to bring us back into the real. He talks about Plato as being it's a flight away from reality. The good is a flight away from reality. We don't want that. We want to be able to engage and come back with this engagement and harmony. And there's a longer story also for Plato, because the Platonism at first, Nietzsche's like, well, Platonism at first is very, very elite. It's for a small group of people who are the followers of Plato. That's fine. But he thinks also that over time, Christianity takes over Platonism and makes Platonism for everybody. And that's when you start having the dominance of slave morality over master morality. So these are the things he wants to kind of go back. Nietzsche doesn't think, we just go back in time. But these are the points we need to think through to see if we can change the relationship between them.
Yeah, well, we still see a lot of, Christianization, if you will, of the Greeks, right? People are always trying to find Jesus in Aristotle or something like that, which is terribly obnoxious. Um, I guess this idea of culture is a big one, right? I guess Nietzsche's question was, and I think a question we have, so I'll bring it a little bit more present, is how do you build a culture in some ways, in his context? I guess in a more modern context, it would be, how do you improve a culture or sustain a culture or try to, I don't want to say fix, but culture is not a static thing, right? I think it's a kind of living thing. It's a thing that's always kind of moving and changing. Before I get to democracy and all of its issues, what do you think about this idea of culture for, in terms of, Nietzsche's ideas about it for kind of for us in a modern place? We have these ideas, I'll say, I'll get a little bit spicy here a little bit. Culture is really wrapped up with a lot of the times, I think inadvertently, with nationalism or patriotism, if you will, right? This is how we do this in this country or in this space or in this region. And for people that come from outside, well, that's not how we do it. So you have to adapt or things like that. There's a distinct kind of what you were saying. There's like the German way, or maybe there's the British way, or there's the American way, or whatever. And there's a way in which that looks, which would be a kind of, you're taking something that people from a long time ago built, and you're preserving and maintaining that, through time, and you should continuously build on that and progressively hopefully make it better. But there is a kind of, I would assume, and maybe I'm wrong here, a buy-in to that. Like there's a culture. Like if I move to uh, Ghana, there's a culture there. Generally, I would imagine that is different from Mexican culture, right? And that they have a history and they have time and they have different people groups, etc. America or United States is a little bit different. They like to pride themselves in, the whole melting pot thing, and we're, nation of immigrants, sort of, and all that stuff. And so I guess how do we see, in it makes sense for Nietzsche in Germany's time of, okay, we're trying to be like actually the current modern state of Germany, not Prussia, not anything else. So how do we make this distinctive? That's a kind of newer thing. I guess that might be the last thing might be the most thing that's coming to my mind is like when Czechoslovakia broke up. It's okay, how do we have like the Czech way and the Slovakia way, whatever. But for the United States or for countries, how do you do that with a place like China, who's been there for millennia, or Egypt, millennia? So how do we think about cultures that have already kind of been established, whether for millennia or in the United States case, 250 years or so? What can we accurately pull from Nietzsche's ideas about cultural generally that we can apply to some of our current modern states about culture?
Yeah, again, a few things to get through there, but I think what's interesting because Nietzsche, you're right. So firstly, I think there's probably that distinction between culture understood as a way of kind of life, and then high culture as in the creation of great works of art. So there's that distinction. But Nietzsche himself at the time, he was very critical, for instance, of universities or philosophy. He was like, well, these are just this is just kind of philosophy or culture that is there to justify the existence of the German or Prussian state. So in many ways, the state is appropriating culture to justify itself, which he didn't want. He's like, no, culture needs to be kind of left on its own and to create on its own. So as you were talking, I was like, I think there's two things we could probably take from Nietzsche. One of them is that, well, if we're serious about creating high culture, then it's not something that just happens on its own. It's something that needs to be invested in. Right. So that's the first question. And obviously, some of the things that Nietzsche was saying to contemporary ears sounds a bit off, but in large, complex, modern societies that we all live in, there are arts councils and there are things like that that do take taxation and then given in a certain direction. This is distribution of resources. We don't have to talk about slavery or anything along those lines, but it is about questions and distribution of resources. So that, I think, would be the first thing by thinking about the political and economic setup. It's like, well, if we're serious about having high culture, then is there enough resources going in that direction? And the second thing would be, I think this goes back slightly to the slave and master morality thing. It's like, well, these artists need to be able to create according to their own ethical stance, not something that's being imposed on them by society. They need to be able to do. Obviously, Nietzsche at the time was talking about, that big distinction. Yes, master and slaves. That can we have a group of people who are not going to be completely subsumed by what he thought was the dominant state morality at the time? Can they do their own thing? Can they live their own ethical lives? And so there's a need also to, Nietzsche has this idea that, well, actually, artists often need to be protected, right? They can be very sensitive, etc., or very, very weak in some instances. Sometimes they need protection too. He would say, they need protection from the herd or whatever it might be. These are perhaps strong words for us today, but that's the language he would use in it. But conceptually, I think that still makes sense to us. It's like, one, don't let the state appropriate culture just to justify itself. Mm-hmm. Secondly, think about, well, if we're serious about this, how do we distribute resources to make it in such a way that we can have, that the artists can be supported or whatever it might be. And three, then again, do not impose on them a form of morality and say, okay, your art needs to follow this form of morality. It's like, no, give them space for them to be able to create according to their own ethical ideas, and actually for that to be a place of experimentation beyond the herd, if you want to use Nietzschean language.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I fully agree. I think when you think about the arts and humanities and how, at least in the United States, there's obviously a less and less from a kind of state piece of it emphasis. People try to defund those types of programs to allow people to do that or to be taught that. And then also I think maybe in a more general context here, there's an emphasis now on creating content and less about creating art. And I think that's a real kind of just poison on our modern culture, because we have a lot of really wonderful tools and people just choose to make content as opposed to art. And that's not for everybody. There's many people that are, but it becomes increasingly difficult when you have to acquiesce to um, whatever the demands are of various incentives. And I think in a certain way, Nietzsche is always kind of prophetic in some ways. You see how that's a perversion on our society. We're not edified by those things, and we're not creating things, and we're not, if you think about in the big picture, in the past, let's say 10 years, what are the landmark things we can say we created? If all we have is content, but we don't have anything that's timeless or that lasts past a certain point, that's such a waste of time and potential creation that we could have. But I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, and I think Nietzsche does move towards an idea that, look, there are different spheres in society, and yes, okay, you have your Instagram sphere of content, and okay, that's how it is, and that's okay. But can there be another sphere that isn't dominated by that? I think that's the position he moves towards.
Right.
Because if you do it historically, it's like, okay, the Greeks, they didn't have obviously they didn't have Instagram content, but they didn't have that kind of culture. It was a very kind of pyramid, top down.
Yeah.
And in his critique of German at the time is that precisely the great culture that they might have had was just being appropriated by the state. So it's been transformed into culture, into content, sorry, as you just said. And he said, well, if we project onto the future, we're not going to go back to the ancient Greeks, but can we find a way in which those two spheres can coexist in some way? And I still think that's an interesting question. I think it's still one of the challenges of contemporary politics. Can there be a coexistence between these two spheres without one completely dominating the other? And at the time, Nietzsche thought his biggest concern was that the sphere of content, as you've just described very nicely there, was completely dominating the other one, and the other one didn't have any space to do anything at all. And so that's and working out how that coexistence might happen. I think it's still one of the big questions of contemporary politics. If we are committed to this idea that, yes, as you say, it's important to have high culture. It's important to have these timeless works of art and not just Instagram content. If we want something beyond that, then these are the questions we need to be asking ourselves. And Nietzsche obviously was trying to, sometimes perhaps virulently, because that was the environment he was in, he was really trying to fight to create a space within which that would still be possible. Mm-hmm. And I think that's still a valid fight for us today.
Yeah, I totally agree. So let's talk about kind of his political philosophy of his theory of state and what that meant. So we've been talking kind of around it, but kind of more directly. He wasn't a big, at least it doesn't seem, he wasn't a big fan, excuse me, of democracy. And now that's going to turn a lot of people off. And everyone likes to pride themselves in saying that they're a democracy. Whether they actually are or not is another question. The United States likes to say they're a democracy. Sure. A lot of Western European countries like to say they're a democracy. Sure. Whether they say that, whether they actually act and function that way, that's another question. I think that's pretty debatable. But for the most part, if you're in casual conversation, people will obviously say like democracy is the way to do things. Everyone has a equal share to say and blah blah blah. He didn't like that. It doesn't seem. And so, what's how did he see a decay of the state? You can talk about what he thought the state should be, what the decay of that would be, and why democracy was not the way, or why he was not favorable for democracy.
Yes, well, so there's two things there. So there's the state already, and then there's democracy. We've spoken a bit about the state, yeah. And for him, he was hoping the state would be a tool within which high culture could still thrive. So that was always the kind of the idea. So for democracy, and it's important to remember also, again, he's running in the 19th century. So the democracy that he knew is very different to the democracy that we know today. Yeah. So for him, it's kind of an incoming tide. He does have some experience. There's some elections that he is. There's actually an election in Germany, but he's too young. I think the voting age is 21 at the time, and he's too young. He doesn't get to vote, but he does see an action. He spends obviously a bit of time in Switzerland too, which has a bit more of a history of direct democracies. So he witnesses that. So when he talks about democracy, it does also mean different things. Even when we talk about democracy, we mean often different things. Do we mean do we mean the institutions, as you rightly say? Do we mean the kind of like the ideology of saying, democracy is everyone's equal? what are the different things? And you get that play also with Nietzsche.
Yeah.
So the short answer is to say he associates democracy with slave morality, right? The idea everybody's equal, and the grade should be cut down, and we don't want any of that, and everybody should live in the same way, et cetera, et cetera. He really sees democracy as we talked about Platonism, how Christianity picks up on that.
Yeah.
He thinks of democracy as a kind of form of political Christianity. If Christianity has this idea that everybody's equal in front of God, then democracy is the political version of that.
Mm-hmm.
So there's an immediate association with slave morality, which he's worried about. So he's worried about the general leveling of society. It's like, if we go towards democracy, there definitely won't be any space for high culture, because precisely they say, well, no, it doesn't accept the fact that there has to be a degree of inequality, whichever way you want to conceptualize that, to be able to have high culture. If there's democracy, everybody's equal, then, well, no, there's no space for artists who are trying to do something different, because that's beyond the hurt. So there is that worry. Having said that, and he does talk about institutions of democracy too, and sometimes he says, well, the fight for the institutions of democracy, sometimes these are good things because they kind of erect barriers. And it's when he's talking about does he really mean democracy? Does he mean liberalism? Those terms are a bit more fluid in the 19th century than they are for us today. Right. But he does have these ideas sometimes. There are certain things that are constructed which guarantee certain things, certain rights. Well, maybe that's a basis. That's a good thing. You have rights. That means these can't be taken away. So we can maybe build on rights, and to have like art rights for artists, or it gives a degree of protection. But he does ultimately see. So with Nietzsche, there's always different moving parts. He does like, okay, there's going to be democratization, understood as a general leveling of society, equalization and homogenization of society, which he was against. Yet at the same time, he said, well, when that process is kind of going to a certain point, then there will be, because this is the Nietzschean credo, which is that it's only through an aesthetic phenomena that life is justified, right? That infamous line from The Birth of Tragedy, which I think he holds to throughout his life, which is why high art is so important, because you need a way. If we're just here on Earth suffering animals, at the end of the genealogy of morality, Nietzsche says the problem is not suffering or pain. The problem is giving meaning to that pain. And there's different ways you can give meaning to it. You can give meaning in the Christian way of giving it, right? But it's always aesthetic. And even Christianity is very aesthetic in different ways too, right? So you always need this aesthetic justification, whichever one is going to be. Obviously, then he has his ideas about which ones are better than others. The Christianity one is not really what he wants. Maybe we can have a bit of high culture. So even in this leveling, democratization, homogenization, at a certain point, because there's always a need for justification that democracy, on his account, does not provide, this will call upon a new, what he thinks, a new kind of artistic class who will be asked to provide that justification, right? So there's this kind of like inverse, if you want, curve where, yes, there's homogenization, there's all these things, but life and even democracy still needs some form of aesthetic justification. And if that is then there, democracy will call upon these new philosophers. These are the people he talks about. Oh, the free spirits, the new philosophers, the legislators, the nobility of the future. That's who he has in mind. It's like, yes, there's a process of democratization, but at a certain point, there'll be a call for these new people. And he's trying to prepare the ground for these new people. He's also trying to prepare these new people too. Often his writings have to be understood as like, okay, you guys or you people, when the chance comes, these are things that you have to think about. So don't fall for slave morality. Don't fall for that. You really need to do your own thing. That's in many ways the kind of the call for arms that you get in Nietzsche.
Yeah, you explain it really nicely. I think, I wonder, you made a distinction there between democracy as a kind of concept, and democracy as like a kind of, how we see political institutions or things like that. And I wonder, you tell me what you think here. I think on the human piece of it, I'm not sure what his views are on, is everybody created, equal kind of thing as a human, so like we're all humans, we all should have certain kinds of rights. But I think, and this is this is something that I'm more comfortable with, but I think most people aren't, is there's wonderful inequalities among people in their merits, their talents, their abilities. And we should promote people that have, for example, I mean, there's plenty of people that are much smarter than me, much more talented than me, much more athletic than me. And that's fine. That's not something that at the end of the day, life is a kind of game of luck, right? So if you have a certain circumstances or certain genetics or a certain environment, good for you, right? I don't think that's anything to be jealous about necessarily or whatever. But I do think that it doesn't make me any better or worse than a human being. I think we're all just humans and we're all a fortune of luck in a lot of ways. But in terms of your abilities or your merits or your genetic disposition and or your environmental context, yeah, I mean, there's people that can create music and make high art that I can't. And I want to put all of the stuff into those people, make great films and, books and literature and so many other things. Obviously, the physical sciences as well, and all the things that people can create. I mean, I don't have the mind of an engineer or a physicist. Absolutely, we should push those people up. Well, that's what helps us, people that are building rockets and building AI and building, yeah, we should boost those people. But that doesn't mean that the folks that are doing things that aren't in that way creation. So the person that changes my lights or fixes my plumbing or whomever, that they should be treated less as a person, and that their work isn't unimportant. It's uniquely important in some ways. But for people that are creating art or high art, we should invest in that. So there is an inequality there in terms of one aspect of it, which I don't have any uncomfortability with. I know a lot of people do, but personally, I don't. But I guess is that how do we have or how is his thought on I guess equality kind of like on a baseline as a kind of human level? Did he really believe that there were people better than others? Or was it just kind of the talents and merits and all the other things that he was interested in?
Yeah, let me take that in different terms. I think you mentioned at a certain point, you said envy, it makes
Hmm.
certain people are envious. I think that was the thing that he was most worried about, right? Is
Hmm.
that kind of slave morality, say, no, you people, you can't do this. We want to cut you down the size of it. So that general kind of like envy, ressentiment, right? All these terms that he uses, resentment, etc. That's what he wanted to push back against. So there's already that. Second, yes, of course, as you just said, he did think there were certain people who were able to create high art and others people who couldn't. And then again, as we've been talking quite a bit about how to organize society in such a way that those people are
Right.
perhaps promoted.
Hmm.
And there is, I think, with Nietzsche in general, the sense that he wants people to be able to develop as much as possible. And so the question is does society allow that, yes or no? Or is it kind of constraining? This is often the thing we talk about state morality, is that it constrains people that might have done something else or say, no, you can't do that because it's not morally good or whatever it might be. It places a constraint, whereas Nietzsche's people, it's about flourishing. It's about human self-flourishing. That's, in many ways, one of the figures that we have from Nietzsche is the Ubermensch, right? It's overcoming humankind as they are. He wants that to be able to continue. And if we have this envy, resentment, all these types of things, then we're not going to have that. So there's that. Then there is that question about Nietzsche does talk about aristocracies.
Yeah.
And so that is a kind of a thorny question. And it's a thorny question also, not just also in how we interpret Nietzsche, but also for us today, I think.
Hmm.
The one thing I would say is that he doesn't think that there may be a natural aristocracy, but it doesn't necessarily, I don't think he believes in aristocracy in the old sense of the word of the bloodline. That I don't
Hmm.
think he has much time for. Um, so he doesn't have much time for that, but he does think there's probably a natural aristocracy in the many ways that you've described there. Some people are excellent, physicists, and some people are excellent artists or whatever. And
Right.
I'm neither of these things either, right? And I have no problem, and I think this is great, and I think we should be encouraging all these people to do all this fantastic stuff. So
Hmm.
we're on the same page for that. And then, but it does then go back to the question of how do you organize society, and Nietzsche does talk about wanting to keep these two kind of spheres differently. There's this idea of because he has this idea, the notion of the pathos of distance.
Mm.
He said, oh, well, those who will achieve great things is because they are used to looking down on other people. So there is an element of that in Nietzsche. Now, the form that takes is, it could be lots of different ways in which I think does it mean economic difference? Does it mean simply a cultural difference? They say, well, we look down on the content people, Instagram influencers. Yeah, we look down on them, and we try to do something else. We try to do something that's more worthwhile or timeless, as you say. So I think that can manifest itself in different ways. I don't know, to some of your listeners, maybe I'm kind of slightly unsharpening Nietzsche's fangs, perhaps, like giving it a slightly soft version of him. Because he does say kind of quite stringent things about aristocracy, caste society, which he's very interested in. And the question is, yes, when he's talking about them, he's obviously giving historical examples. But I think with Nietzsche, then the question becomes, not just for him, but for us, it's like, well, what does that mean for us today to talk about these types of things? And I think we can articulate them in the way I think hopefully we've been doing so far. There's ways in articulating and make us think about it. And I think that's probably I don't know if that's what Nietzsche would have wanted, but certainly that's how I move forward, if you want, with Nietzsche.
Yeah. I mean, I think that there's the hard parts for me about Nietzsche and his philosophy that I don't want to say I agree or disagree with. It just always challenges me. That's just the thing. And I think obviously he's not perfect, of course, but he's definitely someone that pushes you to really reevaluate your ideas about things. It's like, I think this way and I feel this way, but damn it, why? I mean, he's pushing me to think about that. But the hardest things are, slavery, caste society. Those are the things that are always the hardest for me, obviously, because we understand, slavery is terrible. There's not the finer sides of a caste society that we see in some countries. And then, I think he has of the time, these, there's maybe not of the time, but definitely shortly after, and by today's standards, some misogynistic views about women. I mean, I think those are always the sticking points that people have of criticism of him, which are fair. I mean, those are totally fair. But the slavery caste thing is always a hard thing for me because I try to, if you're trying to read it accurately, I mean, obviously, just the word slavery just has negative content. There's no like finer side to slavery. But I wonder, is there like in philosophy, things are a little bit more flexible, I guess, in some ways, and I don't know if that's a good or bad thing, but is he in how you, if you're trying to create culture, you're trying to have a philosophy of life, you're trying to understand how humans can be not beholden to a type of slave morality. What does that look like for everybody? But also, it does seem that he's trying, I don't know if he has the answer, but he's trying to figure out how do you organize a society politically too, right? He's trying to, I don't think he has the definitive answer, but one of that is, it does seem he does subscribe to a kind of tier system, that there is a hierarchy. It definitely feels hierarchical. Not in a way where people don't have, I don't think, value per se, but there are some abilities or merits that we should, put more weight behind than for others. I don't know if there's nothing in his philosophy, in my reading of it, that talks about dehumanizing people or anything like that, or calling for people to be put on camps because they're worthless, because they're part of the herd. Like, there's nothing like that in any of his philosophy. So I think it's just, that's where people kind of assume that kind of language goes. But how do you kind of see these ideas of, like, his ideas of slavery and a tier system? Where do you kind of see where his thinking is on that? Again, it is kind of a thorny issue.
Yeah, you're right. You say the slavery one is the biggest challenge. But you've also said, the way that Nietzsche writes certain things and then to challenge you. And like, for instance, the stuff about the Greek state, that was in many ways a polemical piece against Wagner, right? Because they're having this argument about what's relationship. And when Wagner was talking about slavery in a modern German context, what he had in mind were the factory workers, right? Like he was like, these are the contemporary slaves, the factory workers, and they need to be liberated also for us to have a truly high culture. And Nietzsche is saying, well, no, actually, we need these people to work in these factories so that other people don't have to work in these factories. That's the polemic. So that is an ongoing. It's an ongoing challenge. Sorry, there were other parts of your question, perhaps that I. Can you remind me?
No, that was a big thing. Was how does he? My understanding is, again, you're reading somebody that was writing in the 1860s, 70s, and 80s. So he's talking about slavery. He's talking about a caste system, which in our modern context we just see those as like taboo words. But you're right. Like, if you maybe it's not the language used. It's maybe an example of this is like, Freud had a bunch of language or words he used as well that seems so strange to us in 2023. It's like, what is it, neuroticism, and there's all of these different ways in which hysteria and all these things that we don't use anymore. But I think you have to be careful with like retranslating in some ways. But if he's talking about slavery in a sense of like, yeah, people that let me put it in a modern context. Yeah, people that work at McDonald's and or people working 3 jobs and like they're kind of a slave to like this is to economically, we obviously need people to work in those places, right? For sure. But maybe it's like that's a kind of, you're beholden to a kind of way of like life, and that's there has to be people that do those jobs. I think where you can maybe build off of that is saying like, yeah, we obviously don't want to mistreat them. You don't want them to have unequal pay, but some of that has to get done, and some people don't mind it. I know plenty of people personally that like doing kind of like day labor work. They like it. It's very, they don't want to be creating and philosophizing about all these. They don't want to do that. They like bricklaying. They like putting up roofs or drywall or whatever. That's fine. They have a very simple life, and it's very nice for them. And so, but would you call that a kind of slavery? I mean, slavery is obviously like you're treated less than an animal, you're not paid, and all these things. But I wonder if there's a kind of flexibility there. Maybe not. And that's, I think, one of the hardest things with him is, how do you take something from the 1870s and this idea of what he was saying about slavery from that context, and maybe it just doesn't apply in a modern context. But it's a challenging thing, I guess.
He does have this line at one point. He said, well, if you, somebody who spends 2/3, if you don't have 2/3 of your day for yourself free, then you are a slave. If you're spending 2/3 of your day doing something for somebody else, whether you're employed or whatever it might be, then you're a slave. So like, if that's the criteria, then, we're all slaves. Yeah. Right. So, and he does have, that's to go back to the slavery and the Greek question, because he says, well, yeah, of course, there's all these people who were at the time were slaves, but he does have this idea that their life is justified because precisely there's this great artistic, cultural development, and that they recognize themselves that their work has contributed to it. And in some ways, his concern is that link is lost again in modernity, where people are working, but they don't see like, oh, I've done all this, but like, how is my life kind of justified? So I think that is still, I think that's a reflection. It's true that he does like caste society, like he's interested in the Indian caste society, that he learns about. Although and of course, partially there is that you have kind of the intellectuals, the Brahmins, who are the higher caste. So this is something that he's quite in favor of, because obviously he wants to protect philosophers, artists, and people like himself. So and he doesn't want to. I think it's still important to put him kind of like in this context, and why is he writing these things, and who is he kind of targeting? Because obviously in the 19th century, still very dominated by the church, by the military, these types of things that he wants to attack. And he says, well, at the moment we have these people, and they're the ones who are at the top of society, but they're not the right people, and we want to take them down. And obviously you're saying he has some very strong words. We know about priests and religion and Christianity, right? So he wants to invert that. He uses that like the caste society. He said, well, caste society in India has these untouchables, right, who are at the very, very bottom. And he calls, but so I don't know if this is the right term, but the term he uses is chandalas to describe them. He says, so what we need to do is we need to change it around where it's the priests who become our chandalas, right? We want to reverse a society within which we're, and they're the stronger kind of words that are used. Although I try to argue in my book, it's like we have to understand this as more of a spiritual warfare. It's not going to be a physical warfare, which would be a form of petty politics anyway. We need to get away from that. So I think these are the ways to hopefully think them through. It's clear that he wants some kind of hierarchical society. It's clear that he thinks that the people at the top of the hierarchy should be the artists, philosophers, these types of people, and not. In many ways, that's often the criticism of democracy too. It's like, well, look at the kind of values that democracy promotes. It promotes, billionaires and athletes and all these type and superstars, and it's like, well, maybe that's not the values that we want to promote or put on a pedestal. Perhaps we should be putting philosophers and artists or whatever on a pedestal. So that's also, I think, a helpful way of thinking about it. But there are the slavery one is the hard case. So a hierarchical society, but as you rightly pointed out, we live in democracies. There are as many hierarchies in our democratic societies. There's we have the economic 1%, right? And who have disproportionate influence on not just our economy but our politics. So if you put it back in that context, it's like, well, okay, the hierarchies exist. Who do we want to put on top, or can we defend other people who are not on top at the moment? Yeah, and I think that's the way to think about it.
Yeah, for me, if you take the biggest, the big picture idea, can you imagine a society like you were saying where instead of we say, well, that's how it is, or money makes the world go round, or things like that we say. Imagine if we were very active in choosing the society that we create, where we put philosophers, we put really good thinkers, we put artists, we put people that do all forms of or all mediums of art, and that became the standard, right? There's another conversation to be had about what is art, which continues to be debated for, ever and ever and ever. So, right, the banana stuck to the wall, that's not art to me. I don't think that's art to most people. I don't want that to be the standard of high society. Please, no. But, people that are writing good novels and making good films and making good music, things that obviously there's a range where art is, different preferences and styles, but that people are ascribing to it. And I think if you had, I have no idea how to construct a society in that way, but if you had incentives that were promoting that, if you gave people the space, right, kind of this time, energy, space to create, I think you get a lot more out of people. And most people do things because they have to, or because they need to pay something, or because they need to. And so much of our society is dominated by an economic or consumerist thing. And so, obviously if you go down that path, that leads to kind of Marxism and communism and fuck the system. And that's not what I'm promoting per se. But I do think in a way, imagine if we had a society where, right, likes and retweets and, Instagram influencers and reality TV, wasn't, poisoning our mind. And instead we had ways in which we were, we had the space at least to find the art, and that was encouraged. I think that would be demonstrably different in how people are. Imagine if you come into a world where that was encouraged. Don't be the doctor or the lawyer necessarily. You can if you want, but go do philosophy. Go do actual psychology. That would be a much different world. That would be I can't even conceptualize that world. Maybe that's a good science fiction, unfortunately, science fiction story to write or make, but that would be interesting. And I think that's a society I think a lot of people would want to live in. But, I think we, kind of go to our instincts, our negative instincts, or this all id of making money and all these things. And that's still where our livelihood is, even in the face of, big catastrophes. We're still trying to find a way to greed and trying to have money generally, which is frustrating. It's very frustrating.
Yeah, which is, there's a lot of emphasis in Nietzsche on morality, right? So we have a morality that values what? It values, money, and it values these kind of material things. And so, yeah, and I think for Nietzsche, I think he does move to the position to say, well, if we can't have philosophers or whatever as the top of society, then but can we still have a space in which they can kind of do their thing?
Mm-hmm.
And in some ways, I mean, one simple thing might be, what would a Nietzschean politics be today? One of them might be, have give more funding towards arts councils or whatever it might be. That may be, or education obviously is a kind of an important one. And then we can dig down because I think Nietzsche would want to say, a lot of the universities today are perhaps not doing what they really should be doing.
No.
They're training people and et cetera, et cetera. And he was already at his time critical of the kind of dominant Hegelianism that was there at the time, which is like, well, it's just creating, philosophy is meant to, and education is meant to challenge you and make you think differently. Here, instead, what we're having is we're getting all these people who are going to be trained to be civil servants or soldiers, et cetera, just going to feed into the Prussian kind of war machine, the great politics Prussian war machine. It's like, well, that's not what education should be about. So, we can look at different things and then say, well, this is what he would want to say about that. In the book, I spoke because given the context, he was really talking about Europe and how he didn't want these kind of like nationalistic wars between France and Germany, et cetera. There, he was thinking more, actually, the future really would be something about European unity and creating a European culture. That would be something that would be new and worthwhile trying to achieve. There's different ways in which that could be articulated also today. Mm-hmm. So yes, it's true. There's the interpretation of Nietzsche, and then there's how we try to use what he's given us to think about. And I always think, yes, what you get is you get these ideas. You get master slave morality. You get different things. Whatever. So obviously, you have the ideas to Ubermensch, eternal return, culture, all these different things. And you say, well, he's given us all this. We get a sense of what he meant by it in his time, which is obviously different to ours. But if we still have these categories of thought, they can help us still think about where we are today and think through those categories too. Precisely. So you say, well, yeah, we live in democracy. Okay. What's valued in the democracy? Well, it seems to be these types of things that Nietzsche might have called, these are just examples of slave morality, right? You have followers, right? Yeah. On Twitter, it's the herd, like that's it, right? It's like in many ways, okay, so we can use these categories and say that and say, okay, right, that is there. There was never an idea in Nietzsche, well, we should get rid of that completely. I mean, because the line is always like, he doesn't want to get rid of slave morality. He wants to get rid of slave morality, claiming it's the only morality possible. That was really his kind of war horse. And so, okay, well, we have that. We have followers, blah, blah, blah. And, we're all guilty of it, I think. And then, but is there space for something else? And what is that space? How do we create it? How do we defend it? Blah, 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 blah. That was the question. I think, and that's fundamentally still, I think, a very valid question for those of us who think this is important.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that's going to exist and always exist probably, but we shouldn't encourage and push for that. That shouldn't be the aim. That shouldn't be the thing that people aspire to, right? I think this aim you find within yourself is, how do you find, a kind of master morality and a morality that comes from within, that you understand for yourself, that you've found or you've uncovered, not just kind of manualized, handed to you by society or religion or any of these other things. It's something that it still may be that you have similar moral ethics, right? Of don't kill people. That's not a good thing to do. That's fine. You don't have to believe in a religion to know that, though, right? The fact is that you find it for you and it's yours. And most people, I think, fall in line in a lot of ways and that, of things, but there is going to be a flexibility there. As long as you know it and it comes from within you, I think that's a little bit better than just saying like, well, this is what my priest or whatever told me to do. And it's like, okay, that's not going to be very helpful for you as an individual when you're making choices or not. And I think that's kind of his project. A few questions here. So Zarathustra's, I mean, it's his greatest work. It's what he said was his greatest work. It's amazing. I guess that most people think about it in a variety of different ways. But one of the questions I never thought about, I kind of thought about it when I was reading the book, was how do we see some of his political thought in Zarathustra? It's not something I kind of look toward Zarathustra for, but if there is any in there, but where do you see some of that, or where does that comes out?
Yeah, I'm not sure it's his most political
Mm-hmm.
book. The main thing coming through in that is the thought of the eternal return. That's really the Übermensch, and it's linked to the eternal return. Although, the very first scene when Zarathustra goes down to the marketplace and he tries to teach them the Übermensch, and everybody laughs at him.
Yeah, I came too
And
soon.
then
I came
yeah,
too
yeah,
soon.
exactly. And then he teaches them, the last man, and they all say, yeah, that's what we want, that's what we want, that's what we want. I mean, in some ways, that's already very political, which is like that's the challenge of
Mm-hmm.
politics. Is that
Mm-hmm.
everybody wants to be the last man, or at least this account, everybody wants to be the last man. And how do you even go about trying to create the Ubermensch? And the only follower then he has, and he doesn't want followers; those he wants kind of companions.
Mm-hmm.
That's a key separation. Is the gesture who ends up falling to his death, and he buries him, and that's it. And okay, so and then there are certain, so it's perhaps a bit. I mean, like the whole of the book anyway, it's kind of more oblique anyway. Um, but there's even those discussions about the flies in the marketplace, or how do you deal with people who are trying to take you down, or kind of full of resentment, trying to take you down, and how Zarathustra tries to avoid them. So those are the ones that open the door, I think, to those political questions. But those books, Zarathustra, as such, I'm not sure it's the most political of the works. There have different ones that are a bit more talk more directly. I mean, this is also what we tend to forget, is that Nietzsche does have sessions where he talks directly about politics. Human or Human has all these sessions
Yeah.
on democracy, on the state, and Beyond Good and Evil has it too. He talks about international politics, nations and nationalism. What is it to be noble? There are these sections that are directly on politics. Perhaps it's not constructed in the way that Hobbes's Leviathan
Right.
is constructed, right? But none of Nietzsche's books are constructed in that way anyway. So it's a bit silly to think about it that way. There's always different themes, and it runs across it. So reading him is kind of a challenge too. And I Zarathustra is wonderful. And I know with universities, there's a tendency to teach a genealogy of morality in many ways, because again, it's
kind of more straightforward.
Yeah, it's on one theme, and so you can read it through, and it kind of makes sense. Whereas if you read Beyond Good and Evil, then you have all these different themes. So it's kind of harder to teach. But I still think that Beyond Good and Evil is perhaps one of the most complete of his texts.
And I just reread it. It is very complete in a lot of ways. Yeah.
Yeah, and I tend to recommend it as actually the text, but to read, if somebody wants to read Nietzsche, it's like, read Beyond Good and Evil. That's the one.
That's what I say too. I say, if you want a good kind of, some people ask me that, what's a good place to start? And I'll say, well, you can read really anything, but I would say maybe don't start with Echo Homo. I usually say Beyond Good and Evil is a good starting point. And then usually Gay Science shortly after that, which is my favorite.
Right.
So I guess the other thing I want to ask real quick is you kind of, I think, end with these kind of principles of his great politics. And you talk a couple of principles. The first one is creating a power to breed a superior mankind as a whole. Another one is war to death against vice and all types of anti-nature. Creating a party of life, and the rest follows from all of these. So, what do you make of these kind of principles here about his great politics?
Yeah. This is Nietzsche trying to think through how could he affect change. So it's also at the end of his life where he, the way I interpret it at least, I mean, people, we can talk about him going crazy and how that, and the impact that might have on some of his later writings. But I think he's at the point where he has developed all his main philosophical, I don't want to say necessarily system, but his philosophical ideas are there. Whether it's the Ubermensch, Zarathustra, the eternal return, the will to power, all these types of things. He has this, and he's like, okay, well, if I'm serious about this, and saying Bismarck this is a form of petty politics, then whoa. And I started to develop a vision about at least where European unity would be something very important within that, away from the type of wars that France and Italy and Germany, et cetera, are having. And how would I start going about achieving this change? And how would I, these figures that I've called upon, that I keep calling upon, the free spirits, the new nobility, the legislator of the future, how do I put this together in a way that could be actionable almost? I don't like that term, but in a contemporary setting. And I think that's when you get these types of principles. And I put a lot of emphasis on this idea of the party of life, of people, of bringing these people together across Europe, like-minded people across Europe, and then for them to really start pushing for the things that they find important. And it is important to remember, we were talking earlier on about the distinction that Bernard Williams actually nicely makes between morality understood as an institution that's kind of imposed on you and ethics, something that you develop yourself. We are luckily freer, I think, in our 20th century society. Perhaps religion doesn't have the same hold as it did then, and it's not institutionalized in such a way. But Germany at the time as well, it's like you have a king, you have an emperor, you have the state religion, you have the military. Everything's very much imposed on you. There's a lot less space for the type of free spirited, free thinking. And so within that context, how do we get a group of people to try to push and to try to create that space? And so this is what Nietzsche's kind of, I think, trying to write at the moment. He's calling for, an international movement. This is the 19th century also. International movements, you have Marxism, you have international socialism, you have these types of things. And when they mean party, they mean these types of international movements. And he would have witnessed some of them in Switzerland and Basel. He would have seen there was international. He's like, well, why don't we do something? Why don't we guys do something similar? We who think we want to defend high art against these threats that we're seeing from the church, from the military, from these wars. We want to defend high art. So how do we go about doing that? And let's try to get together. It's an international call, and he has specific ideas about who should be in it. Which are interesting, to say the least, compared to where he was then appropriated afterwards. So I think that's how to think about it. He's trying to set out, and there's this conundrum, because on the one hand, obviously he's calling for these figures, but these figures, if they're going to be something new, then you can't predetermine what these figures are going to be. You can't do, if the Übermensch appears, we can't say what the Übermensch will be, precisely because the Übermensch will have overcome the modern humankind that we are. So we can't say it is. But we can set as kind of a context or a structure, or give certain elements, certain morality, certain virtues too, right? Nobility, be hard, these types of things that he talks about at the end of Zarathustra. And the party of life then is this kind of idea, well, you can bring this all together, and this international movement will try to create a space within which this creation can keep coming, and perhaps then, move towards these overcomings of modern 19th century humankind into something new. And that could be the aim of that association. And why not? Yeah, why not?
Yeah, I think that it's a big project that I don't know if anybody's taking it seriously, and I think that there's a lot of things there. So my last question for you is how can we, should we apply Nietzsche's great politics for navigating our politics, society and culture, and 21st century? I mean, we're a quarter of the way through the 21st century almost, and how do we pull from some of his ideas, with accuracy of sorts, to say there's things we could really, really get here, or maybe internationally, or in certain places, for our own politics, or how we improve our culture or society. What can we say of how this applies for us in the 21st century?
Yeah, and I think you can divide that question also into two and say, well, on the one hand, what does Nietzsche give us in terms of being able to analyze the society within which we are, and then maybe the more normative element to it. And I think I still, these master and slave morality, you look at certain political developments. I wrote when the book came out, it was just around the time of the referendum, the Brexit referendum in the UK. And this was my attempt at having some kind of influence. I wrote a piece defending the idea that the UK should remain, because you could say that the Brexit case was a form of slave morality, right? What was it? It was about fragmentation, nationalism, pettiness. It was all these things. So there's ways in which I think those categories can still help us make sense of the politics of today. And then there's the normative elements behind it too, which is like, okay, well, what are the things that we're still trying to encourage? We're still trying to encourage the formation of free spirits, ethical, personal development, and also high culture. And these are things that are still applicable today. And there's a lot of, I suppose I'm not a US expert, so I don't want to say too much about the US, but a lot of people say, well, look, are some of the terms that Nietzsche had come up with, resentment, ressentiment, how valid is that to help us understand some of the politics driving Trump today, right? Mm-hmm. These are things that are still valid and help us understand hopefully what's going on by using some of Nietzsche's ideas. Yeah, resentment. Is there a degree of like petty politics? There's a lot of nationalism. There's a lot of rejection of the other, right? That's one of the elements of slave morality. Is master morality starts with affirmation of oneself, or slave morality starts with a rejection of the other. So anything that's like all these like xenophobic elements, nativism, rejection of international cooperation, blah blah. I say, well, that's a form of slave morality in politics that we follow if we're interested in what Nietzsche's saying, that we could criticize as being a form of slave morality, and then figure out what the opposing master morality that we might be able to get behind would be. And I think those categories still help us. Mm-hmm. And then yes, trying to defend culture in the large sense as best we can.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the big project for each of us, is how do we not continue to give clicks and eyeballs and incentivize on our own will these things that we don't like. And I really try to tell people that don't react to the hot take, or don't encourage reality TV. Don't do those things. Invest your time in other things. It doesn't need to always be intellectual. There can always be time for kind of taking it easy and, kind of relaxing in certain ways. And that's fine in a modern sense, but don't give more incentives for things we shouldn't encourage. And I think that's difficult for all of us, and for some more than others. But I think we have to be the ones to kind of build culture in a lot of ways in the current state. And so that's just kind of important for all of us. The book is called Nietzsche's Great Politics. This is through Princeton. It's out everywhere. It's been out. It's fantastic. Everyone should pick it up. And I have to say, this was a fantastic conversation, Hugo. I think I'm very excited to read what you're working on next. And I wish you all the best for that. And so a big thanks for coming on here and talking about one of my favorites. I really appreciate it.
Thanks to you, Xavier, for the great chat and for the plug. And yeah, with pleasure, hopefully when I finish the book, pleasure talking about elites and democracy in some time in the near future.
That's great. All right, thanks.